Right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get underway for the final plenary. If you'd like to take your seats, please, if you're joining us for this session, if you want to have a chat, please do it outside in the anteroom. If you want to join us for the session, please do come in and sit down. Yeah. Right, you people over there at the front, on the right-hand side, please sit down or leave the room. We're going to begin now, okay? Right, ladies and gentlemen, we've saved the best till last. This is the big session on business as a partner in development. As you will have just seen, it is a controversial topic, but we have some very interesting speakers. I want a lively discussion in the room today. I want you to drive where it's going, not just me. I can ask questions all the time, but they may not be the questions you're interested in. So if you want to take part in this session, put your hand up and I will bring you into the discussion. I will introduce the panel in due course, but we're going to begin by way of introduction with a short video.
The private sector is a crucial stakeholder in the GPEDC and helped decide the 10 indicators of progress at Busan and the 4 principles for effective development cooperation. Development has never been about one type of work or organization. Success requires us to work together, openly, transparently, and understanding the point of view of other stakeholders. The private sector is a powerful engine for economic growth, but it needs to be harnessed in the right way to ensure that growth is inclusive and sustainable. When reality doesn't live up to corporate ideals due to poor safety standards or a lack of accountability, trust is damaged and progress is set back. But things are changing. Oxfam campaigned to get the world's 10 largest food brands to improve their standards in land policies, workers, women, the climate, and transparency. They have all improved in the last 2 years. Deloitte's 2012 Zero Impact Report measured progress towards sustainable business. It showed that out of 65 leading companies, 45 were experimenting with sustainable business models, but only 6 were rated as making significant progress. These private sector partners are leading the way, but we have more work to do so that sustainable business becomes standard practice for all. Some innovative companies are already using their core business to drive growth and create jobs in local communities.
Ethiopia has one of the fastest growing economies in Africa, but 50% of the young people are unemployed. The construction and infrastructure development work is in full swing at the moment. In 2012, UNIDO, in collaboration with SIDA, Volvo, and the local school, Salam, established a training academy for heavy-duty commercial vehicles to provide a badly needed skilled manpower for the private sector. At the same time, to provide opportunities for young people to get gainful employment.
The private sector often holds the key skills, expertise, and technological solutions. And with UNIDO's catalytic support, we can jointly adapt products and services to local needs at scale and level that result in transformational change.
Through this innovative public-private partnership, UNIDO, Volvo, and SIDA are working with the government of Ethiopia to train local employees and equip them with skills which will create new employment opportunities now and in the future. Training staff and creating local jobs is good for business, but it also helps to solve long-standing problems which hold back development. Other innovative partnerships are driven by a development challenge, but draw in the private sector to solve it. One example of this is Clean Team Toilets, a business that was born out of a desire to solve a difficult problem, the lack of domestic sanitation for the urban poor, and a joint venture with civil society, local government, a multinational company, and local entrepreneurs and workers.
So we've built this offer, which is to provide a toilet to families with no sewer, and that toilet is serviced on a 2 or 3 weekly basis. Partnerships is very much part of our DNA. So we are a partnership. We have members from the private sector and members from NGOs, and we have an academic member. And we work together in a new way, which effectively is drawing on the skills and expertise from different sectors to try and address a very complex problem.
Anadwo sɔre akora ne tɔrɔ bi kora na wanya oyemu ehie. So betum rikanka mecha kwa ni mu no. Eno no we ne aboa pa.
Many new partnerships are being built, but some companies were founded on principles of sustainability as part of their core brand. One man who had this ethic instilled in him from an early age started a company with community and partnerships at its heart. Rohan Mali has gone back to his family's farming roots and founded an ethical coffee plantation.
Mali Coffee started from a dream, you know. About 1999, I had the opportunity to purchase a property in Jamaica. It's acre upon acre upon acre upon acre that we have researched and found to partner with different farmers throughout the world. As Mali coffee grows, so shall the community, because we cannot have one without the other. The community take care of the land entails take care of the community. And that's as simple as you can take it, you know. Profit isn't about tomorrow. Profit is about the years to come. Profitability is about building a reputable company and building relationships with the retailers, with the consumers. That's profitability.
The Global Partnership is a new opportunity for all development stakeholders to work towards a profitable future for everyone, learning from one another as equal partners in the process.
Working in partnership, we can ensure that our initiatives reach the people on the ground and that they are sustainable.
Well, the private sector, whether you're talking about individuals, say small-scale farmers, or whether you're talking about large national companies or multinational companies, have a key role to play in development. But what's crucial for whether or not that contributes to development most effectively is whether that growth that is being promoted is inclusive and directly benefits the poorest and most marginalised groups.
I think that people need to learn to work together better. Governments are doing their jobs, and some of them are really doing fantastic jobs. The philanthropy community is doing great jobs, and the private sector, civil society. But I think there's still, room to improve how we work together collectively to address some of those global challenges.
The private sector can have an enormously positive impact on development if it operates responsibly, transparently, and sustainably. We need to harness this potential in order to build on global progress towards the Millennium Development Goals and meet the challenge beyond 2015 of ending absolute poverty in every country, so that we can build a brighter future for us all. The tide is turning, but the greatest challenge still lies ahead. Working together, we can rise to meet it.
Okay, some introductory thoughts there. Let me begin by introducing our speakers panel today. Starting on the end, Peter McAllister is Executive Director of the Ethical Trading Initiative. Next to Peter is Helen Hai, who is CEO of China Africa Consulting. She's an entrepreneur, very well known for opening a very successful factory in Ethiopia. Next to Helen is one of our co-chairs at this conference, Justine Greening, the UK head of the Department for International Development. Next to Justine, of course, we've already also heard from during the course of the last 2 days, is Betty Miner, the CEO of Kenya Manufacturers Association and also a member of the UN high-level panel for the post-2015 agenda. Next to Betty is Martin Acosta, who's also an entrepreneur and the CEO of Kiwa. I think he's got some of his products in his bag that he may want to wave around later on. And next to Martin is Suma Chakrabarti, who's president of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. So welcome and thank you for being with us. We're going to begin only one person gets to make a speech, and that's because she's a co-chair, and that is Justine Greening. Justine, you have pushed this particular agenda very hard in your role in the UK and also in your role here as a co-chair. So if you'd like to go to the lectern and explain why, we'd be grateful.
Thank you very much, Krishnan, and thank you for agreeing to moderate this final plenary session, which I think is an incredibly important one, and it's one that we need to make sure that we get right. The Global Partnership is about working together to share best practice, and it's about identifying new ways to meet the challenges that we face in countries on their development journey. And we know that ODA funding on its own just won't be enough to achieve eradication of poverty, which is what we are aiming to do. So we have to involve private sector investment. And it means building new partnerships and finding more effective ways to work together with the private sector. Doing that will be crucial for delivering the post-2015 development agenda and ending absolute poverty in every country. As co-chair, the UK has been clear from the beginning that the Global Partnership's about action, not just words. It's about finding practical ways to improve implementation and to improve cooperation. And in the more complex world of development that we're now in, it's about improving implementation. And working in partnership is no longer a nice to have, it's a must have. So it's something we all need to look at how we can do better. And the private sector has been a big part of development for decades. But often the development community has seen this as something separate from its own efforts, and that has to change. Because if we're going to build more next-generation partnerships between business and government, and if we're going to meet the challenge of ending absolute poverty in every country and deliver the post-2015 development agenda, then business needs to be part of the development push. And many organisations here are already working with companies around the world to co-invest in development projects. But I want to see this happening more consistently, more strategically, and more effectively everywhere that we're operating. I believe that institutions like the Global Partnership are crucial for building consensus and changing attitudes. And we can only change attitudes by being in the same room, by talking and listening, and through that, better understanding. So, business needs to talk with the civil society organisations, and civil society organisations need to talk with business. And I hope today that we can take a step towards that coordination. We also need better strategic coordination so that the successful partnerships that already exist can be scaled up, and so that we can learn from the evidence of what works best. We need to change cultures and skill sets in government. And we need to encourage more businesses to support new business models in frontier markets. For example, accepting a longer-term rate of return than they normally would, but one that can help economic development happen, and in doing so, create jobs and prosperity. And we need to identify innovative new ways to work together, to leverage private sector skills and finance for development. One example is through development impact bonds, which have the potential to drive much needed investment and innovation into developing countries. Sharing the skills and finance of the private sector can create the jobs and growth that those countries need to escape poverty for good. DFID will be providing new support for development impact bonds, using our skills and our expertise to plan and develop how they could work. We'll bring together investors and other organisations to design new investments and to learn how to design new bonds in the future. This morning, we also launched a roadmap for partnering between government and business, which DFID has funded, but is the result of broad consultations with stakeholders from partner countries, with development agencies and businesses around the world. And I'd encourage all of you to read it and for your organisations to get behind and support it. But at the same time, we also need greater transparency, more traceability of supply chains, and stronger support for responsible business practices through standards, such as the UN Principles on Business and Human Rights and the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. So there's a challenge. We can no longer put working with the private sector in the too difficult box, and it's time to rise to that challenge. And I'm encouraging all the organisations represented here today to think about how they can help to drive greater transparency, both in business and in government, but also how we can work together to achieve a step change in the effectiveness of our partnerships. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, as you take your seat, I mean, let me just put the basic concern to you and take it head on. As you say business needs to be in the room. Why does it need to be in the room? Business will do what it's doing anyway. Business is not, on the whole, driven by altruism. It wants access to markets. That's why it's doing much of what it's doing in the developing world. And its CSR programs are all part of that as well. So why do you need to bring them into this process when if there's a buck to be made, they'll go out and do it anyway?
Because we have a great opportunity to shape the private sector investment that's already flowing into developing countries to get the biggest possible development impact from it. And I think we can do a better job of that. But also because these are new markets, and actually we want to see the sorts of new products and innovations that the private sector can bring that can really help people in those markets. Some of the new technology that we're seeing is really transforming lives for the better. One of the best investments that DFID has ever made was with Vodafone investing in the M-Pesa mobile banking system. Now, a huge percentage of the Kenyan GDP goes through M-Pesa, but also a lot of welfare systems and indeed health systems now use M-Pesa to make sure that they can reach patients so that they can get treatment. So actually the private sector's got a crucial role to play, and we're really missing a trick if we don't engage with it to both encourage it to do more, but to help shape the investment that's already going in.
Betty Minor, I mean, the big question is, where is the business benefit? And is it going to be the same old names, the big multinationals, or is it going to be small, medium-sized enterprises, local businesses in developing world countries? How do you ensure that that development and this process meets those people and not just the big corporate giants?
Okay, thank you very much. I think the best way to ensure that it benefits all businesses is not to focus on contracts, but to focus on a business environment, improvement of an environment for all to participate and for all to grow. I think the reason why we believe that business has to play a role is that there is no sustainable poverty eradication without jobs. But it isn't jobs because of government contracts or because of contracts that have come from aid products. It's because of the ability, the creation of an environment for small businesses to grow. So if we can direct development assistance at improving the business environment, the rule of law, improving infrastructure, improving the court system, it is critical, and many businesses will be able to grow out of that. But the second part is that it can also be used by governments to focus on specific support policies for small businesses, perhaps local procurement for women-owned businesses or youth businesses or other local enterprises. But the bigger question is that once you create, and I think that's the reason why we need to focus on aid that creates a better environment for businesses to thrive, and therefore focus especially on the business environment.
But this is a very tough choice for governments, isn't it? If we're talking about ownership of this agenda by developing world countries, they will have to decide where to spend their money. And if they're spending their money encouraging business or trying to leverage finance, that is money that could equally be spent on basic services, health, education, water, electricity, which are the basic needs that they need to address to meet poverty and to eradicate it. That's a tough choice, isn't it? Why should it go to business?
Okay, well, it's a basic principle. If you want to support a change of livelihoods in persons, you need to give them capacity. You can either give them education or give them the capacity to educate themselves. I think we have a saying in Africa that says, if you want to feed a man for a day, you give him a fish. If you want to feed him for a lifetime, you teach him how to fish. Now, the best way to eradicate poverty is to create an opportunity for livelihoods. That's the basic thing. Create opportunities for employment and for self-employment and for dignity. So governments can either focus on just social services or focus, and I think our suggestion and our strong suggestion that they also need to focus on creating the environment for economic growth and for enterprises.
Okay, Justine, you want to come in?
And you'll only have long-term sustainable investment for health, for education, for water and sanitation, if you have a private sector that's creating jobs and taxes that they can pay to a government that they can then invest. That's how every other developed country model works. And it's one of the reasons why in countries around Europe, people are focusing on growth and jobs, because actually that's where you'll then see increased tax revenues, which then mean you can invest in all those vital services that people depend on. Unless you do that, those countries will forever be dependent on other countries like the United Kingdom to help fund their health and education. I believe countries deserve independence from aid, but this is part of the solution for how we achieve that.
Suma Chakrabarti, you're trying to come in on this point. I mean, give us your perspective from the bank's position.
Well, let me come in on this point. I think this idea of a trade-off between the profit motive and the development motive is simply overdone. I mean, give you a couple of examples. I think businesses want development. They want a larger group of consumers to which they can market. That helps them grow. So profit and development go together. You see companies in many countries growing over time from local companies to regional to national to global. That's part of the development process. I'll give you another example at the project level. EBRD is well known to be a very pro-climate change sort of bank. We've been dealing with sustainable energy in a very big way. Over a third of our investments every year. That has been working because companies recognize that helps their profitability to cut energy costs in the production process, but it also helps the climate change agenda in their countries too and globally. So that works too. This other thing about the state and the state, and its role in private sector development, we need a state that actually helps with the regulatory environment, that champions the consumer, make sure there's competition, and we need the state to do all of those things really well. So the state is important, fundamentally important, to private sector development too.
Peter McAllister, are you convinced by this?
I'm just going back to your initial question. Business will do business where it can make money. I mean, that's absolutely clear. But if you look at that paradigm over the last 30 or 40 years, it doesn't necessarily deliver good development. The checks and balances you need from government, checks and balances from civil society, effective unions, help create that development. So absolutely, we should let business get on and do business. But where the aid and the development community can help is make sure that's delivering decent jobs, where people have the right to join trade unions, where people's rights are respected, where there's development of the human resource in the country naturally, where there's partnership with local companies. So if it's an external investment, it's not just investment in and then money out.
And do you think there, I mean, that is politics ultimately, isn't it? Do you think there is the political consensus to deliver what you're talking about? Or will some regions, some countries just want to prioritize business rather than good business?
If you'd have asked me 2 days ago, I would have still said it's a very, very fragile situation. But I've genuinely felt inspired by the last 2 days. There are good companies here that get actually to be sustainable, to support their business in 20 years, to support their brand. They need to be part of this. There are governments, there are finance ministers saying, we get it. This is about developing our country, being a partner with business in the right way, a partner with CSOs, and delivering that benefit for the economy at large.
That's very interesting. So you're saying you changed your mind in 2 days. I mean, what has changed your mind?
I'm a confirmed skeptic. What it's helped me realize is there are enough people in this room who want to make that work. And if we get behind it, and if we're serious, and if we show it can be done, we can bring an awful lot more people with us.
Helen High, tell us about your experience. I mean, tell us why you did what you did, which was to go from one part of the world to another and set up a factory.
Okay, to tell you the story about the shoe factory, I have to first start with a person, Justin Lin, where he is. Probably he's in the audience somewhere. It was March 2011 when he was the chief economist of the World Bank. He actually advised the late Prime Minister of Ethiopia to go to China to find a shoe producer to come to Ethiopia to create jobs and generate export. And the late Prime Minister took his advice and went to China in September 2011. And that's why I came to Ethiopia in October 2011. I did not choose Ethiopia. Ethiopia chose us. And at that moment, I made a decision to have an investment. And with less than 3 months' time, I started production for the export market. And in the following 6 months, I doubled the export revenue for Ethiopia in the shoe sector. And by month 12, I employed 2,000 local workers. And in year 2, I employed 4,000, nearly 4,000 local workers.
And what did you pay them, and what were their working conditions, and how did you decide what kind of standards to meet? I said, how did you decide on their working conditions? What did you pay them? What were their conditions? How did you decide to pitch it at a level or a standard?
Okay, talking about the working condition, first of all, we were not producing for local market. We were producing for international market. We were producing brand like Guess, Naturalizer, Mark Fisher. In order to produce those brands, we have to satisfy the international standard. And we have to take the international audit for our factory. And actually, in reality, we were also in the process to apply fair trade for our factory in Ethiopia. And then talking about how much we pay the workers, and actually, to answer that question, I have to tell you, I didn't come to Ethiopia to do development. As a result, maybe there's job creation and export generation. But for private sector coming to places to Africa, there must be a financial factor reasoning for them. This is the fundamental. And I would like to share with you my observation why private coming to Africa. If we're looking at the manufacturing and industrialization, there are 3 very important players in the supply chain. The first is manufacturers, the second is traders, and the last one is the retailers. There has to be incentive for all of them in order to be able to produce in Africa. So let's start with maybe manufacturing, also answer your question. The labor cost in labor-intensive manufacturing in China is about 22% is overall cost. Each labor in China is $500. Each labor in Ethiopia is $50. When the efficiency is the same, I can reduce from 22 down to 2.2. But then people always argue, what's the real efficiency? Is that 5 African labor to 1 Chinese labor? And I approved with my own production, I can achieve 70% of the efficiency after 1 year's training. That means with our training and our hard work, we can reduce from 22% down to 3%, which gives us 19% in direct labor saving. People always argue Africa is not ready for manufacturing yet because it's the poor infrastructure. Ethiopia ranked 156 in World Bank's doing business. That is true. In order to export 12 containers of goods every month, I have to import 8 containers of raw materials to do that. And what happened to my cost? In China, my logistic cost is about 2%. In Ethiopia, I have to pay 4 times, which is 8%. That means I have to pay 6% more in absolute value in logistic costs. But that still gives me a saving of 13%. And that is the true reason why manufacturing coming to Ethiopia. They didn't come to Africa to do development. But as a business, as a result of the business, we did achieve maybe some goals.
Peter, what do you make of that?
I think the first response is to say I really welcome the frankness and honesty, because far too many companies tell you they're just there to help the world be a better place, and they suddenly stop caring about their shareholders. So it's really good that we're hearing a very honest perspective from business. Business is about doing business. I don't have a problem with that. I do have a problem with the fact that in states that don't have a long history of checks and balances, where you're using labour which is mostly young women, there will need to be representation, preferably from trade unions, that mean that business can run effectively, make sure workers are protected, that the right health and safety conditions are in place. We've seen this in India, we've seen it in Bangladesh. Just leaving it to business alone doesn't necessarily deliver the conditions. So I think we should applaud the investment, we should applaud the entrepreneurialism and the energy, but we need to complement that with a development perspective to make sure we get the full benefits.
Martin Acosta. Sorry, I don't want to cut off the applause. Although the more you applaud, the less time I have to talk. Martin Acosta, you founded a company in Ecuador based on sustainable principles. What does that actually mean in practical terms?
Thank you. Thank you. Hello. Okay. Thank you. Sustainability for us was the main focus when we started this. As a CEO, I thought, sustainability means survival plus what are we going to do in 25 years from now, 50 years from now? We decided to focus on a triple bottom line, so profit, people, and planet. We had actually seen that, and we still see, that those companies that engage in this triple bottom line tend to be more profitable in the long term. And that's a key motivator for us too. And we clearly see a tendency that way. We are approached by more investors all the time now, not only impact investors, but the real sharks, the ones that are after the financial profits, because they see that if you focus on sustainability over the long term, you'll be more successful. In terms of what means sustainability for us, I think a CEO has to have sustainability, in his eyes, to see tendencies, to identify opportunities, threats in his mind, to see, how we adapt to changes, how will we make a lasting impact on society over the long term, and also in the heart. In the heart, very important, because we have to passionately transmit these to all our collaborators and also to all stakeholders. In the case of Kiwa, what we did was, we started walking the talk. We walked the talk by, first, Kiwa, the brand, means green in Quechua, the native language of the Andes. Friendship is one of our 4 core values, friendship with all stakeholders. We just signed with 1% for the Planet, which is a certification that forces us to give 1% of our sales to environmental charities in the States. And we keep making all the sustainability innovations that we can. We are using, we are recycling the packages, for example, to make gift bags. We have actually half-size business cards. Yeah. And imagine if all of us had half-size business cards, then that would mean...
We'd all have bad eyesight. But just, do you want to come in better? No, okay, sorry. Just park that there for a second. I mean, I want to bring in a couple of thoughts from the floor. Claire Coffrey is here from ActionAid. Let's bring you into this. Did you want to ask a question or make a quick observation, a very quick observation? Where's the microphones?
Thank you so much. I did have a question to ask. It was more broadly around the extent of private sector engagement in these last 2 years. I think Helen Clark talked of private sector storming the stage. But my question is, if the private sector is such a strong partner at the table, is it time that we really started talking about accountability for that partnership? And so, cutting to the chase, my quick question is now the time for the private sector to commit to endorsing the Busan principles like civil society did back in 2011?
Justine Greening.
I think it's actually incredibly important that the private sector does start to up its game on accountability across the board. I think the good companies that are already involved in development are already doing that. I think the challenge is broadening that out to make it the norm and not the exception. But I think we'll only achieve that by engagement. And I don't think you achieve it by shouting at people. I think what you have to do is get in the room like we're doing today and start explaining why it matters. Start understanding that if there's investment going in, surely it's better to work and shape it as it's going into a country rather than play catch up after it's happened and it's not been as effective or as good on labour rights or working conditions as we'd like. That's why we've got to work together. And I think we can all see some of the challenges, but what we've got to do now is rise to those challenges and find solutions, but be prepared to congratulate the companies that are actually doing a good job and prepared to meet those standards. But yeah, absolutely, lobby the companies that aren't and get private sector to pull in more private sector. But I think none of this will happen if we don't get beyond identifying the problems. We've got to now start talking about solutions and work together collectively to try and achieve them. Helen.
Before we're talking about the responsibility, maybe I shall share with you some observations after my factory in Ethiopia. For the 4,000 workers we employed, before they come to work in the factory, there were liabilities for their family and the community because they don't have a job. After actually they worked in the factory, because we were providing free meals, free clothes, free transportation, free accommodation for the workers, the salary they earned becoming savings for their families. They started to support their family and the communities. And for them, they also, by work, they learned a skill which they can benefit for life. And I'm sure quite a lot of workers, in a few years' time, they will leave the factory and set up their own factory in Africa. And secondly, one of the examples, because we were providing the free meals for the workers. The chickens in the 2 nearby villages, in a few months' time, has been bought all of us. The farmers were extremely happy because he can expand his business because we arrived. And the workers, because they have the luxury, after they have the salary, they can spend. The local business in the village has been boosted. And last, I think success breeds success. Before we arrived in Ethiopia, Ethiopia also have an industrial zone. That zone struggled for 3 years to find one player becoming a resident to export for the overseas market. But last 2 years of my production, last year, Ethiopia launched its own first government industrial zone. With less than 3 months, without any advertisement, 22 factory sheds was let out immediately by people from Bangladesh, Korea, India, China. They were all doing export. So the snowboarding effect has been huge in Ethiopia.
Okay, Sima Chakrabarti.
I think it's quite possible and a good thing if the very large companies, for starters, start to sign up to the Busan Principles. I think they're the ones most likely to do so. But I think the biggest benefit, frankly, is taking the Busan Principles down to company level and to national level. So the way EBRD is trying to do this is when we work with a company, let's say in Moldova or Georgia or somewhere like that, we're working on corporate governance standards that match the Busan Principles, and they have to sign up to those principles. That is something they can see very tangibly is to their benefit. It gives them a competitive edge over other companies. Secondly, at the national level, let me give you a very current example. It's businesses in Ukraine that wanted an anti-corruption initiative. An anti-corruption initiative that's going to be in line with the Busan Principles on transparency, the ability to actually take your complaints to an independent ombudsman. It's businesses that have gone for that. And that's, again, tangible, something they've driven with us, with civil society as well, and with the new government. So I think that's probably the way businesses are going to make their strongest contribution to Busan.
Betty, were you wanting to come in?
But one thing I'd like to stress about accountability, and there's a lot that has been said, and there's many companies that are engaged in this voluntary reporting and extensive reporting. But in reality, and there's been a talk about greater maybe global accountability, and I agree with it. But in reality, I think we need to really build at local structures of accountability and at national level. We cannot just hold, most companies are not multinationals, but they are companies nonetheless, and they have an impact on society. So we need to build on local accountability, whether with civil society or with parliaments. Most companies, and I speak for the ones even in small companies in our countries, operate according to the laws of the country. If the law permits $25 a labor wage, that's what people will pay. Whether we consider it internationally a living wage or a decent wage is a totally different example. If most companies don't mind monopolistic environments, whatever happens to consumers, but we need to change that at the national level to ensure that there's much more competition. So as much as we focus on global accountability, we need to build the structures of local accountability at all levels. And a lot more assistance should go to building national accountability structures.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to park that there for now, because I'm going to introduce 2 small case studies that we can look at that will introduce a couple of other new ideas. Can I first invite up onto the stage a young entrepreneur from Pakistan to tell us her story in 4 minutes and no more, Sabine Mahmood. Give her a round of applause.
Good evening. It's truly exciting to be here today and to be part of a global conversation around how to nurture entrepreneurial ecosystems in developing countries. My name is Sabine Mahmood, and I was born and raised in the port city of Karachi, home to 20 million people. Karachi is a violent, chaotic city beset by crime, poor urban planning, and a total lack of government ownership. However, despite all its troubles, Karachi has an inescapable energy, vibrancy, and resilience, and even though it drives us mad on a daily basis, there's no place I and millions of others would rather be. I am an honorary college dropout, and I spend a lot of my time raging against the fascism of traditional schooling and the damage it causes to the creative process and the development of a creative thinking mind. My personal struggle at school was one of the primary motivations for founding a social enterprise in 2007. I wanted to create an alternative learning space, spanning the spectrum of the liberal arts, an incubator for emerging talent, a platform for creative expression and open dialogue on contested issues, and a meeting place for entrepreneurs, activists, rebels, artists, writers, poets, musicians, journalists, thought leaders, and people like me who have trouble dealing with the status quo. Now, I live with my mother and grandmother. We are a middle-class family and have no savings, land, or jewelry. And at the time that I started thinking about this ridiculous, ambitious initiative in late 2006, I had a grand total of £100 in my bank account. My maternal uncle, who lives in the UK, had sent across 10 lakh rupees, which at the time was about £6,000, for my grandmother's health fund. She was 82 at the time. And he said, please store this away for a rainy day, because you might need it. By now, I was deliriously obsessed with my idea and decided to tap into the health fund. I went to my grandmother and told her that if she fell ill, we'd inject her with a triple espresso, which would either cure her or kill her. And she giggled, and she gave me her blessings, and proceeded then to have a heart attack the following year, and then colon cancer. And so we went through some very rough times. Now, I spent the next 4 years building out Peace Niche, which is what my organization is called. For 4 years, I didn't have a salary. I begged, I borrowed, I maxed out 7 credit cards, I took loans to pay off loans, and stopped just short of stealing. I remember my mother asking me, what the hell are you doing? And I said, I'm gambling. I was sleeping less than 3 hours a day, and stress levels were incredibly high, but it was all very exciting. Now, unlike most nonprofits and NGOs, I built in revenue streams from the inception, determined to live the sustainability mantra that the development world talks about but doesn't really practice. Through our various initiatives, we incorporate a cafe, a bookshop, an art gallery. We make our own merchandise, and we provide a sales and marketing and retail platform to artists and artisans and musicians. We rent out space to startups and the entrepreneurial community, and also work on exciting design and tech projects that further our liberal arts and culture agenda. And through all of this, we generate 45 to 50% of our operating budget through these revenue streams. But there is a shortfall, and it's a huge struggle. And with all due respect, I have a huge problem with the development sector, at least in Pakistan. And my mother works for a nonprofit, and I have observed over the years the heavy-handedness and inefficiency with which donor agencies operate. At least, again, I speak for my country. I have not approached any of them for funding, primarily because their models make no sense to me. One organization for which I have immense respect and who saved us from oblivion is the Open Society Foundation, and they gave us a grant in 2010. It was a one-year grant, but because we make our own money, we were able to make it last for 2 years. They gave us the money and got out of the way. Didn't ask for monitoring and evaluation and all kinds of reports and administrative burden that would prevent us from doing our work. We will turn 7 in May 2014. And the attempt to blur the hard lines between academic disciplines and to provide a holistic stream of programming, alternative film screenings, poetry readings, stand-up comedy, theater, dance, music, essentially anything we can get away with has been realized. And against a backdrop of horrifying violence, growing Talibanization, and shrinking space for liberal ideas, we have been able to provide breathing space for intellectuals, the growing creative community, and aspiring entrepreneurs. And the city has understood that we need dozens of such public community spaces where people can come together around shared ideals and common interests. For an entrepreneurial ecosystem to be developed, we need a few things. We need people to understand and respect the changing nature of work. Entrepreneurs and startups don't like to sit in cubicles. They will rebel against the 9-to-5 workday. and they will not fill in these M&E documents. We need co-working spaces, we need accelerators and incubators that also deliver short targeted learning programs based on specific needs. We need angel investment funds and VC funding. We need people to write checks that will validate the power of ideas. Some impresarios need to come in and burn some money. We're a risk-averse nation, and we need an enabling environment for young people to choose entrepreneurship as a career option. Otherwise, they will just continue to be slaves to the corporate world, and they will join banks and multinationals, and we will not see innovation.
Thank you, Sabine. Do you think you can get to the end?
This is the end.
That is the end.
I mean, I have another 2. Anyway, I can stop.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry to wrap you up, but I'm going to come to the speakers for some thoughts on that in a moment. But I want to introduce our next case study to hear from him as well, and we'll do this together because our next speaker is a young entrepreneur from Bhutan. So please welcome Karma Yonton.
Kuzambo. Buenos tardes. Good evening, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm an entrepreneur from Bhutan, a very tiny kingdom, Bhutan, and I'm a trash collector. My name is Karma Yonton. I'm privileged to represent private sector here, but more than anything, I am one among the SMEs that is erupting. I represent SMEs all across the globe. We have a lot of private sector, big player here. Well, I am among SMEs. To talk about my initiative or the small enterprise that I managed back in my country. Right. I became an entrepreneur with the need for the environment, and it was actually the need of my country, because today we have an unemployment rate of almost 3 to 4%, which is considered as very huge in our country, back in our country. So the figure that is reflected in the screen is the amount of trash that is being generated each day in my capital city with 120,000 people. But to tell you that this figure 20 years ago was just 8 tons, and then 10 years ago it became 25. And it is expected to leap to 63 tons by next year. So I saw a gap. I saw a gap to be an entrepreneur. I just went to the landfill, and I was startled to see most of the trash was recyclable, and it was disposed of in the landfill. The very instant I decided, why not I be an entrepreneur? Why not I create something of my own, a job? We started identifying the areas where we can get along, and I could realize that the private sector was missing in the waste management culture in my country, because it is not a huge amount for a big industrialist. For a big businessman, 51 tons isn't a big amount. So since it wasn't a massive amount, nobody was interested. But I felt that I can get in as an entrepreneur. We identified that there was a space for entrepreneur to come for in this particular industry. And then we started working on with whom do we need to work. There we are, Greenaway. My initiative is known as Greenaway, by the way. It's a small enterprise. We identified financial institution, and it was real tough for me to get lend money from them because I had no collateral. It was a talk of 5 years ago. We identified city council, public sector, and I was thinking that we need to have a public-private partnership model. And I was able to get it done. When I started my initiative, my small company, we were just 8 of us. And today, to let you guys know that we are 41 people working with this small company. I'm the CEO. And also to tell you the environmental benefit that we do, we are diverting almost 3 tons of trash that was going to the landfill. It comes to our site now. We recover it. So in short, I would like to say that Greenaway has created jobs. It has contributed in saving environment, and as well, we are making an informal economy. And we have more than 200 registered or informal, indirect employee who works in terms of contract basis. Well, that is how it worked, and I'm here. Now, to tell you about SMEs, more than SMEs, I would like to tell you that I would like to remind the panel here, and your excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to remind you that half the world's population is youth today. It accounts for 3.5 billion people, and 90% of them are living in developing countries, whereby 50% of them are unemployed. A small figure to share, more than 76 million young people are unemployed. I'm very much restless because 47% of the world's unemployed are youth. We need to work on it. We see high-level meeting happening, but we now need to, our idealism needs to turn into realism. That is what I feel. Young people has the solution. Please include us on board. We can offer you solutions. Please invest in young people, because I personally feel that investing in young people, in short, is the most effective way to meet your development priorities. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. Tashdele.
Betty, what can development organisations do to better support people like Sabine and Karma?
Okay, the one answer that came to me was you just need to be more flexible and listen to people at their point of need. It is easy to design these programs, and I think Shabin mentioned that. It's easy to design these programs in London, in whatever other place we design the programs, without paying attention to the needs on the ground. And you create such rigid structures and make it very difficult to get the help that people need. What they required was, one, they required money. And money that was, was easy to obviously put together. They wanted somebody to take a risk on them without having to prove that you've done this before. Perhaps venture capital would do that, but you can also design aid funds with the venture mind, with a venture capitalist in mind. Secondly, I think you also need to employ a lot more people who are entrepreneurs in these aid programs, who understand the challenges of entrepreneurs. But the third thing also goes back to what I'd said earlier. We also need to address the business environment in which they operate. Why is it so difficult to mobilize money if you don't have a track record? Why is it so difficult to register a company? Why is it so difficult to get a loan? There's so many things that are wrong with the business environment. And there's enough studies that show us that red tape in many poor countries, and Africa is one of them, red tape is so pervasive and one of the hindrances against young entrepreneurs and small entrepreneurs. So I think we need to be addressing both the business environment, but also channeling the money in a lot more flexible ways and using entrepreneurs in aid programs.
Suma, would you invest in them?
Yes, I would. I think the key thing is to actually tailor the financing according to the need of the company or the entrepreneur or the non-profit company. Betty's absolutely right about that. One of our great successes is creating a small business service that goes to the heart of talking to CEOs of small companies and saying, what is it that you need particularly to make your company succeed? Is it access to finance? Is it better corporate governance standards and better management standards? What is it that you need? And we would then help try and put together project plans to help that company get what it needs. Let me give another example. I think the example in Bhutan is really, really interesting. You talk about youth. Let me give you an example of women. Female entrepreneurs often are cut out of the marketplace. We know that. Markets tend to be biased against them. The rules are set up in a way that they often can't take part. In Turkey, Many female entrepreneurs of small companies trying to create companies cannot get access to finance from banks because banks ask for collateral, which is usually housing, in the husband's name. Completely locks them out. We at EBRD persuaded 2 banks to redo their lines of credit to these female entrepreneurs, actually, so they didn't ask for that sort of collateral. They asked for collateral they could actually work with. And that's completely changing the dynamic of the marketplace for those female entrepreneurs. So we have to be risk-taking and innovative as well, in the way Betty said.
Okay, thank you. Let me bring in Marita Gonzalez from the floor. Marita, where are you? Here we are. Marita is from the Confederación General del Trabajo, which I'm sure I've pronounced terribly, from Argentina.
Sí.
What's your perspective on this?
Bueno, buenas tardes a todos y todas. Tengo varias preocupaciones, reflexiones sobre todo lo que se ha dicho en nombre del movimiento sindical y también de la sociedad civil. En primer lugar, digamos, me parece que vamos acercándonos a un tema desde lo que es Busan hasta la actualidad, que es desde hablar del sector privado, ahora estamos hablando de lo que realmente es, que son negocios. Negocios que pueden crear empleo o no. Negocios que pueden generar trabajo decente o no. Negocios que pueden incorporar y articular con la sociedad civil o no. Este es el camino que México nos puede dar a través de lo que fue el comunicado, tanto oficial como de la sociedad civil. Nosotros vemos que por lo menos hay una ausencia del enfoque de derechos humanos. Es decir, no he visto ni a los panelistas ni tampoco en la comunicación oficial hablar del enfoque de derechos humanos. En segundo lugar, en lo que hace al entorno propicio de las empresas, que se habló mucho en este panel, se habla de tenemos que tener cuidado con estas cuestiones porque muchas veces estamos hablando de estados frágiles, que no hay elusión fiscal o evasión fiscal, sino que no pueden gravar a los ricos, no pueden gravar porque no tienen la suficiente fuerza respecto al sector privado. Entonces, esto me parece importante que los marcos regulatorios tienen que ser siempre normas internacionales, no puede ser una responsabilidad social corporativa voluntaria, sino que son las normas de la OIT y básicamente los principios de
international standards and the basic principles of decent job. And I think this is very important. And finally, I want to point out, I know that this is a lot, but in order to challenge accountability, are we going to a process where we are talking about accountability? We want democratic ownership, and this means that the favorable environment should be to develop a collective association when a company is feeding its workers. This is not quality. Those are acquired rights. We have those in international standards. We cannot say that this is a voluntary thing or which is a transition to formal economy. We need to at least put the benchmarking linked to international standards, and that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Just to be specific, when you say you haven't heard anything about human rights, what do you want to hear?
Sí. Digamos, a ver, cuando uno quiere plantear el enfoque de derechos humanos, está vinculado a que todas las exposiciones y que también la agenda que se establezca a partir de México y que lo dice la agenda de Busan es la no discriminación, digamos que si se habla de normas flexibles, estoy hablando no de normas flexibles hacia los trabajadores, no, digamos, que se haya una sustentabilidad, una empresa sustentable cuando tiene, digamos,
is sustainable when they have a good environment in terms of community, of social, civil society, when they respect the work rights, when you're talking about not infantile work, not forceful work, we're talking about vulnerable societies. All the examples that have been given as best practices are vulnerable populations, so we have to foster the approach on human rights at its minimum level.
Muy bien, muchas gracias. Señor McAllister, ¿cómo usted maneja esta agenda? No quiero involucrar a todos en esto, pero verdaderamente no está en contra de lo que acaba de decir Marite, ¿verdad? O Betty, ¿cómo manejan esto? Bueno, una de las cosas que me preguntaron acerca de esta conferencia
guiding principles, which is the human rights framework for business. And we need to marry that with this agenda, because it's a strong framework, whether you're a multinational or a small business. It takes people belong gifts and benefits to looking at their human rights impact, which I completely agree has not been heard enough, not just on this panel, but across the board. But the framework is there, so let's marry that framework with this agenda, and then we've got the tools in place to make sure it's not just any jobs in any business, but good business that respects the rights framework, that offers good opportunities, decent jobs, and is in line with international standards.
And Justin Green, you agree with that, don't you?
Yes, I do, and I don't think there's much difference in terms of what we all want to get to. I think we've got to go beyond, as it were, violently agreeing that having good working conditions, safe working environments. DFID is doing lots of work with the ILO in Bangladesh right now on improving working environments, having good representation, and having responsible investment. I think we all have a common goal. What we're trying to do today and yesterday is to say, how can we now go beyond just agreeing that, but achieving it? And we've got to get beyond debate to now working on practical projects together, where we can resolve any differences that are there, but actually start moving towards an agenda of action rather than one of still trying to debate first principles, which actually, once you start to actually sit in a room and say, well, what does good look like to you? What does good look like to me? The answer is, it's pretty much exactly the same thing. So we need to stop talking maybe less about that and start talking about how we can achieve it on the ground for the people that we all want to lift out of poverty.
Helen, briefly if you will, because we're in the last 10 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
One of the things is, it is not, I'm not an economist and I'm not a politician. I'm just a private sector, so I can only talk in the language the private sector talk. I'm not into the language of the development. Actually, I'm learning from you. But one of the things I wanted to say, have you ever asked, how can you set up the production less than 3 months' time? What's the nature of your business? Why you can do it? Before I came to Ethiopia, actually I met a local producer. I asked him, how do you find the workers? They told me, the day you give the salary to the local workers, the next day, 1/3 of them will disappear. 15 days after they spend all the money, they came back to the factory. This is the reality, I mean, before we came to the country. But what did we do? Before the moment I decided to make an investment, I recruited 86 Ethiopia university graduates. I fly them to China to teach them how to make shoes. The ambassador of Ethiopia to China went to our factory in China. He was in tears. He said, as a country, we failed to teach our people how to make shoes. Now I can see you can do it, because you have one Chinese next to an Ethiopian teaching him hand by hand. But it's not our nature to talk about human rights. But we know in order for the company to be prosper, worker retention, it is the core of our business. That's why we want the worker to stay. In order for them to stay, we want to treat them well. That's why we do everything for the workers.
Okay. Thank you. Martin, have you got anything to add on this?
Yeah, I perfectly understand your concern. As I said, in the past, a lot of companies were only motivated by financial profits, not that they are still now. And those companies, you know, tend to take some legitimacy or some credibility from the private sector. We completely agree. Now, in terms of the reporting that is now emerging, thanks to development organizations mostly, in our case, for example, we are issuing social reports and environmental reports all the time. I think that if you comply with the regulations, you know, within your country or within the international standards, and you have certain certifications that guarantee you are doing that, you are abiding by those certifications, then you should be all set. At the end of the day, we are all on the same team. That's why we're all here. In the case of Kiwa, what we are trying to do is raise the productivity and the income of the farmers, and we have achieved that, 50% in income and 30% productivity. And little by little, we tend to talk with them and see how we can improve their living standards. I think that's why we're here.
Okay. Now, we are quite short on time, ladies and gentlemen, but I'm going to throw it open to you to make brief comments. And by brief, I mean 30 seconds. If you can't say it in 30 seconds, it isn't worth saying, frankly, if you can't make it clear. So, brief statements or questions that the panel can then sweep up together. Who would like to kick off? The floor is open. Yes, right here on the front.
Thank you very much. I just want to address once more the issue of education and training. Development needs growth, and growth requires jobs for young generations. And I think in this context we have to understand that this is not a task for governments only. It's also a task for governments and for business associations and chambers of trade and industry. And I think in particular the business associations and chambers could do much more in organizing the companies' interests, in addressing the governments, for example with respect to curricula, and in organizing the linkage between schools and companies.
Thank you very much. And who are you? Sorry.
I'm Thomas Silborn, State Secretary in the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development in Germany.
Thank you very much. A hand went up there. I think, is this the Minister from the Czech Republic?
Can you hear me? I am Martin Tlapa. I'm Deputy Foreign Affairs Minister, Czech Republic. So, appreciate very much the panel, and my comment is that there should be a synergy between the private sector and the government, but the key point for me is that trust, that the civil society will trust the government how they spend the development cooperation money on that and put their share on that. So I think it's important. I fully agree with the effects described by UK Minister on that, but how do you see how to build the trust on that? Because if we would like to invite the private sector and civil society to accommodate, there are different options and of course different aims, because private sector would like to open the access to the market, maybe the government, the civil society is thinking more about the human rights. We have a very good experiences to become a member of the Development Assistance Committee, OECD, which is putting the dialogue and the standards on that. But I will be very happy to share with you the view how to build the trust between the key players, between the private, the government and civil society on the issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me see if there's anyone else, and then I will come back to you. There must be more people who want to speak. Who are all those people in masks? Here's your opportunity. Is there a hand down there? Yes. Can we get a microphone down there?
I think the panel said it all, because there is no way we are going to achieve development without the partnership. Government must be able to put up the necessary infrastructure, energy, road, and develop the necessary human capital. Because business cannot go to places of conflict. Business needs peace. Once business flourishes, then government generates the necessary taxes to provide the social amenities that we need. And therefore, we must work as a team. Business must be there, civil society, and parliament to ensure that we conduct the regulations. The lady from Kenya said it categorically. Why should it take 100 days to register a business? This requires the partnership between government, parliament, and the civil society.
Thank you very much. And I can take one more. Yes.
Hi, my name is Anita Bhatti. I'm Director of Partner Relations at IFC in the World Bank. My question is directed to anyone on the panel, and that has to do with the fact that there are lots of different initiatives around doing the number of things that several of the panelists were talking about. So how do you actually reduce transaction costs in the system and get whether they're frameworks or principles aligned, so that we're not, as global institutions, working on a multiplicity of initiatives, but actually trying to put efforts together?
Thank you. That's a good one to begin with. I mean, let's try and pick up a couple of these points. Suma, do you mind beginning? And I mean, this is, I suppose, our opportunity to throw forward to the post-2015 thought as well.
Yeah, I mean, let me take the role around building trust and the government role. Let me take those two. Building trust between civil society, government and business is absolutely fundamental. The way I think we need to do it is to engage much earlier with civil society than we do. So EBRD, I'm afraid I thought when I joined, we tended to have a practice of engaging with civil society at the end of the assembly line. What we've been trying to do is actually build civil society in much earlier in our strategy work and our project work and our country thinking. That's really, really important. And basically saying, we may not always agree with you, but we want to hear your opinion up front, early. That's part of building trust. Government role. Look, I think government is fundamental to actually helping with private sector development. And I have an acronym in my head always, which is called PIL. I think governments have got to get the right policies in place. If they don't, the investment climate suffers, and the gentleman over there is absolutely right. How long does it take to get a license? How long does it take to set up a business? We have good data on these things now, with the World Bank and IFC's doing business survey, for example. We should use it. Secondly, governments need to build institutions. Institutions help the private sector flourish for development. And part of that is exactly doing as Peter said, is about standards, applying standards, UN frameworks, other standards. The multilateral development banks already do that, but we need to see national governments doing that more. Thirdly, governments need to think long term. These are not issues that can be solved, frankly, within an electoral cycle. They're much longer than that. So you have to actually think about the long term and talk about it. And fourthly, leadership. You've got to, in all these countries, in all walks of life, have policy leaders, frankly, who are willing to challenge bad practices and willing to change the way we do things to encourage the private sector to flourish. I think that's really important, those four ingredients.
Thank you. Peter McAllister, some final thoughts from you.
Yes, you caught me out there. Listen, ETI has been going since 1998 with support of British government. We have over 80 companies, 15 NGOs and trade unions. And it's sometimes a very difficult space. But when it works really well. And we've demonstrated that in Bangladesh, in India, in South Africa, in Thailand, in a whole range of places. So these partnerships can work. It isn't a new thing. It requires effort, it requires energy, it requires courage. But we can get these partnerships to work, and business can deliver more and better for itself and for the development agenda. So we're completely convinced about that. The point that you made is a very important one. There is a proliferation of initiatives and standards and things for business to sign up to. I'm not sure I know the answer, but I think that is not the way forward. We've got to find a way to rationalize these. The Ruggie framework, if you like, is a very good sort of overarching framework for things, but there is a proliferation out there, and it's very difficult for business to navigate that. So there is some work to be done on rationalizing those set of initiatives. I'll leave it there.
Betty.
Thank you very much. I think two things come to mind, and I think I'd like to speak to the question on trust and, well, he's gone, but the bigger role about the role of business and skill development. I think there are two things there. Each country context is different. The reality of Ethiopia is different from the reality of Argentina or of Kenya or of Chad. And policymakers make decisions based on the realities of their countries. It is easy to sit in judgment around the trade-offs that policymakers make, but no, they make a decision, and I think we need to be very conscious of that. Two, some things are not necessarily important not as important to some policymakers. Perhaps ensuring greater employment was very critical for the government in Ethiopia, and perhaps some standards around what we think about human rights and decent jobs might not have been what they thought about in that time. And I think they were right, no, that was right in their context. I think we need to hand it over to them. But the dialogue has to happen in the context of that country, between the governments of the country and business. And I think there's no other way except that dialogue. But answering you, I think in the question, certainly in my own context in Kenya, we see the need for greater participation of business in shaping the educational curriculum, especially higher education, and linking it up to the skills that are required by industry in that context. So I think there's a lot that can be done in terms of partnership between government and between private sector associations and academic institutions and vocational training institutions in creating the sort of labor force we require for our economies and in pursuit of the strategies that have been set up by our governments.
Thank you. And I'm going to give the last word to Justine Greening. I mean, you said this is now about how to do this. You hand over as co-chair today. Does it stop for you? Or, I mean, how do you now take this forward?
I think continuing to work on economic development, inclusive growth, jobs, particularly for young people, giving them the dignity of work is something that will be at the heart of what certainly my organisation, the Department for International Development, wants to continue doing. One of the things that's really come out to me from this panel, and to go to the last couple of points, parliaments do have a key role to play. These are the people who are representing their populations in Parliament, and actually they can be a key role to make sure that those good regulations are in place and implemented in the way that we want to see, but also to make sure that competition law works so you can get more competition in to drive up standards and to bring forward more jobs. But the final point I wanted to make was going back to this, probably the most crucial thing, which was around the What Works agenda, which is essentially about how we can take this forward, and the role of civil society in that. I think so far to now, civil society has played a vital role in often highlighting where it hasn't worked, where the private sector hasn't performed, and shone a spotlight on bad practice, and that needs to continue. I think the vital role that civil society can play going forward is to complement that with starting to help us understand what is working well, and to highlighting the good practice that's out there, to then provide the motivation to say, this is what good looks like, why aren't you doing that? And that's what I want to see over the coming years, so that when we come back in 2 years' time to have the next global partnership, we're actually talking about an agenda of what works in private sector, so that we can use that as a spur for other companies to say, this is where you need to up your game, these are things that companies are doing that are good, and you need to raise your standards to match them. So that's the role that I think civil society organisations can play, and I think business needs to open the door to them to help understand what it's going to take to do a better job on poverty eradication on the ground when they do their investment.
On that note, thank you all very much indeed, and thank you for your attention.